First, I'll show you my test for the employee class. I import employee and then I conduct a series of constructor tests, checking that a new instance of the employee class is created, checking that a new instance of the employees class is created with name, ID and email. Then for the method test, checking that the ID is returned when the getID method is called, checking that the name is returned when the getName method is called, checking that the email is returned when the getEmail method is called. The engineer class also has a series of constructor and method tests. These replicate the employee class tests with the exception of the get GitHub method, which is unique to the engineer class. The intern class also has a series of method and constructor tests which mirror the employee and engineer class tests. The only exception is the get school method test, testing to see if a new school is returned when the get school method is called on the intern class. The manager class also faces the same kind of constructor and method tests. The only exception here is the get office number method test, as the get office number method is unique to the manager class. Let's run our test with npm run test. All tests have passed for all 4 classes with 100% coverage across the board. Now I'd like to demo the application. I'll run the questions and I'll answer the questions to showcase the app's functionalities. As we can see, a new HTML document, Team Profile HTML, has been generated with the user inputs passed in and generated to form the markdown and the respective team profiles. Now let's look at the code, starting with the employee class. The employee class has a constructor function which creates a blueprint object for its class, which will have name, ID and email values. The employee class also has the getName method, which will return the name for the employee class, the getID method, which will return the ID for this instance of the employee class, and the getEmail method, which will return the email for this instance of the employee class. To access its inherited values, the engineer class file imports the parent employee class. The engineer class extends the employee class. The constructor function takes in the name, email, ID and GitHub. The inherited parent properties from the employee class are in the super, and these are the name, email and ID. The get GitHub and get role methods are both available for the engineer class. The GetGitHub will return the user inputted GitHub profile URL for this instance of the engineer class, and the GetRole returns the role for this instance of the engineer class. The intern class extends the employee class. The constructor function takes in the name, email, ID, and school. The inherited properties from the parent employee class are in the super, and these are the name, email, and ID. The intern class has the methods getSchool and getRole. These return the school name for this instance of the intern class and the role for this instance of the intern class, respectively. The manager class also extends the employee class. The constructor function takes in the name, email, ID, and office number. The inherited properties from the parent employee class are name, email, and ID. The manager class has the getOffice number and getRole methods. These return the office number for the instance of the manager class and the role for the instance of the manager class, respectively. Inquirer, FS, and Generate HTML are imported into the index.js file. These are used to ask the questions, write the file, and generate the markdown, respectively. The manager, engineer, and intern files are imported into the index.js file, and employers is declared as an empty array. The isTeamComplete variable is a boolean with an original value of false, and a validate input function is in place to prevent the user from not typing in an answer to any of the input questions. The asynchronous init function initializes the app. It awaits for the create manager function. While the team is not complete, the manager will answer the employee type question. Please select the employee type you wish to add. The choices for this question are engineer, intern, or none. The employee type object will be generated from the manager's answer to the employee type question. If the employee type is equal to none, then the isTeamComplete has a boolean value of true. Otherwise, if the employee type is equal to engineer, then the create engineer function is called. Or if the employee type is equal to intern, then the create intern function is called. HTML is declared as a variable. The generate HTML function is called with the employees array passed in. Then the FS writes the file with the name of team profile HTML, and the HTML is passed in, as is the errors function, to catch any errors and print them to the console if they are present, or otherwise if the HTML file is successfully created, then HTML file created is printed to the console. The asynchronous create manager function creates the manager. It has the manager questions array inside. These questions allow the manager to input the work details about themselves. The manager answers are then created from the manager's input to these questions. A new instance of the manager class takes in these manager answers before the manager object is then pushed into the employees array. The create engineer function is also asynchronous. The engineer questions array inside features a series of questions which the manager will answer about the engineer if they have chosen to add an engineer to their team. The engineer answers are generated from the manager's answers to these questions. The new instance of the engineer class takes in these answers before the instance of the engineer object is then pushed into the employees array. The create intern asynchronous function follows a similar pattern with an intern questions array featuring a series of questions that the manager will answer about the intern if they have chosen to add an intern to their team. The intern answers will be generated from the manager's answers to the intern questions. A new instance of the intern class takes in these answers, and this intern object is then pushed into the employees array. The init function call initializes the app. FS, the path, and the templates directory are all imported into the generate HTML file. The generate HTML arrow function takes in the employees array, and HTML is declared as an empty array. The objects in the employees array are filtered using the filter method, and using the map method, the corresponding function is used to create an employee of that specific type for the manager, engineer, and intern classes. These objects are then pushed into the HTML array. The objects in the HTML array are then joined and passed into the render full markdown function. The render full markdown function is then returned. The render manager arrow function takes in the instance of the manager class. The manager.html template file is read to create the manager HTML markdown with the manager user input. The placeholders in the manager.html file are then replaced with the actual user inputted values for the name, ID, role, email, and office number in the manager object. This works via the getName, getID, getRole, getEmail, and getOfficeNumber methods on the manager object. The updated template is then returned. The render engineer arrow function follows the same pattern, taking in the new instance of the engineer class. The engineer.html template file is read to create the engineer HTML markdown with the user input. Then the placeholders are in the engineer.html file are replaced with the actual user inputted values for the name, ID, role, email, and GitHub keys in the engineer object. Again, this works by the getName, getID, getrole, getEmail, and getGitHub methods on the engineer object. The updated template is then returned. The render intern function takes in the new instance of the intern class. The intern.html file is read, and then the placeholders in the intern.html file are replaced with the actual user inputted values for the name, ID, role, email, and school keys in the intern object. This works by accessing the getName, getID, getrole, getEmail, and getSchool methods on the intern object. The updated template is then returned. The render full markdown function has the HTML array passed in. The full markdown HTML file is accessed by the FS read file sync. The replace templates function is then returned, taking in the template, the team, and the HTML to update the markdown file. The replace templates function takes in the template, the placeholder, and the value. This function works via regular expression. The pattern is that there are placeholder values placed between a double set of curly braces. Via global match, the replace method will replace all placeholders between the double curly braces with the actual user inputted values. This is then returned. And finally, our generate HTML file is exported so it can be accessed by the index.js file.